Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here. Welcome into a special podcast edition of Game Night for Friday night, a Football Friday. We couldn't have it today because of high school football on 97.3 ESPN. So I still wanted to give everybody a little bit of a college football preview for week 10 of the college football season for those of you who look for the picks and look for the previews. Just want to kind of run over some different things, different thoughts for the weekend. First of all, I want to start with this. There were 8 games pulled from the college football schedule this weekend, all due to COVID-19 reasons. There are some COVID-19 positive tests at Air Force, at Navy, at Utah, and at Cal. And all 4 of those schools determined that they don't have enough players who can play. Basically, they are in a position where, because of the positive tests and the contact tracing and the isolation, they don't have enough players to play. So they pulled the plug on the whole thing. And it's a bit ironic because, first of all, this comes in the same week as Kendrick Bourne of the 49ers had a positive test, which took him and several of his teammates out of the Thursday football game. Come to find out that all those tests were a false positive. So don't overlook the fact that as we go along with the rest of the football season, it's currently November 6th as I record this. This is Friday night. I don't want to overlook the reality that we're going to see more and more of these issues with teams having positive tests, contact tracing, all this stuff. But notice how a lot of people are not talking as much about the false positive. And while some people are okay with this abundance of caution, I caution all of you to keep a wary eye out for how much of these COVID cases are actually positive tests and how much of it is just people getting the wrong information and mishandling that information. Also, don't forget that every conference has a different set of rules for positive tests. So, for example, in the Big Ten, you could miss up to 21 days of football if you have a positive test. That's part of the reason why Wisconsin now has missed 2 straight weeks of college football, because they have now had, it looks like, up to 29 total positive tests. Now, they haven't told us if any of those positive tests are false positives or not, because they're just taking those tests on the surface, isolating people, and just waiting the prerequisite number of days of 10 to 14 and then retesting them and then allowing them back on the facility fields. Well, guess what? After this weekend will be 14 days. Whereas we saw what happened in the SEC where Nick Saban tested positive. He had 3 straight negatives, determining the first positive test to be a false positive, and he was able to coach that night. That was about a month ago. So because every conference has different rules, you're getting a whole different set of information. So don't look at all of these cancellations and postponements as one and the same. You have to evaluate them as a different situation, each and every one. Don't overlook the fact that Air Force and Navy are military academies. So obviously, this is not just a normal situation where somebody tested positive for COVID-19. They are much more restrictive and much more stringent in terms of their policies for everything, not just these COVID protocols, okay? They have bigger things to worry about than just football at the military academies. So if they're on lockdown and they're shutting down a game, it's more than just a 1 or 2 guys tested positive for COVID, right? There's something else going on as well that they're concerned about. So do not overlook that every situation is different. The reason why California and Utah shut down is because both of those schools told their conference that they did not have enough players on scholarship available to play football, because after they got through the contact tracing and isolated everybody, they couldn't play. So remember, it's not specifically COVID-19 that is shutting down these games. It's each school's and these conferences handling of these protocols. And wherever your position is on football and sports and any of that kind of stuff when it comes to this COVID-19 situation, remember, we don't know how many of these tests are proven positives versus false positives versus information that we haven't been given publicly, because at the end of the day, these are colleges and they don't have to give us information. There's no collective bargaining agreement here. There's no stipulations by a league telling them they have to reveal X amount of information. These schools give you the information when they get it, whether you like it or not. So there might be a lot of holes in these stories that we don't know about. So I just wanted to put that out there before we get to the preview and the picks. Just running down the schedule real quick. A couple games that I am not giving you picks for, but I'm watching very closely on Saturday. Michigan versus Indiana. I understand Indiana is 2-0, but they upset Penn State on a controversial end of game call in overtime, and they beat a Rutgers team that, frankly, if Rutgers didn't shoot themselves in the foot with a couple turnovers in the second quarter, that might have been a much closer game. Meanwhile, Michigan, a big win in week 1, and then a bizarre upset loss in week 2. So we're going to find out a lot about both of these teams tomorrow, Michigan versus Indiana. I'm very curious to see, can Indiana hang with Michigan's talent? And can Michigan kind of get things back on track? Can they reset the ship? Can they realign themselves? Another game I'm watching with some interest as well tomorrow is the Florida versus Georgia game. This is a huge rivalry in the SEC. These schools have been playing for numerous decades on end. It's a huge rivalry, formerly known as the world's largest cocktail party. Well, it's now a rivalry that's not going to have as many fans there, but it's still a huge game in Jacksonville. This is the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. This is a elite Georgia defense versus an unstoppable Florida offense. We've already seen Georgia get torched by only one team this year, and that was Alabama. Can Florida do to Georgia's defense what Alabama did? I'm not 100% sure, because while Kyle Trask is an incredible quarterback and while Kyle Pitts is a future NFL star, I don't think Florida has the number of weapons that Alabama does. But on the flip side, Georgia's got some offensive questions of their own. Is Stetson Bennett going to be good enough to stay as the starter? Do they bring in JT Daniels to transfer at some point? There's a lot of questions about Georgia and their offense. So this game is going to be an interesting thing to watch, because Florida has a great offense and a horrible defense. Georgia has an average offense and a great defense. And these are two rivals. You know they're going to be up for this game. And the winner of this game is probably going to go to the SEC championship games. Keep an eye on that Florida versus Georgia game on Saturday afternoon. Another game I'm watching very closely. Again, these are games I have no dog in the fight for. I have no pick for. Is Mississippi State and Vanderbilt. Mississippi State started the year on fire with a dominant win. We called it here on Game Night versus LSU. Well, since then, they've lost 4 straight, and their offense has literally fallen apart to the point where they scored 0 points versus Alabama and only 2 versus Kentucky. Their other 2 games, they scored exactly 14 points in each. I don't know if this is a quarterback problem at Mississippi or if this is just an overall talent problem, but Mississippi State went from this high-powered offense that scored 44 points on a hapless LSU defense, and now they can barely score any points. Doesn't make any sense. If they're ever going to get things right, it's going to be against the worst team in the SEC, Vanderbilt. Mississippi State has to prove, not just to me, but to everyone else in college football, that they are not a miserable excuse for a football team, and they got to do it because the rest of their schedule does not get any easier. They need this win over Vanderbilt to get some good mojo, to get their heads back on track. And after this, they got Auburn, they got Georgia, and then the most important game of the year for Mississippi State, the rivalry game versus their in-state rival, Ole Miss. So this is a game that Mike Leach and his team has to have, and I'm curious to see, do they actually get the job done tomorrow? Another game I'm watching very closely is this Clemson Notre Dame game. I know this is the game of the weekend for a lot of people. And the reason why I have no pick in this game is because of who one of the teams is. I know what I'm getting from Clemson. Even without Trevor Lawrence, DJ Oyunlele has done an incredible job in just one game showing you that Clemson can still win games without Trevor Lawrence. But I don't know what Notre Dame is. Notre Dame is the strangest undefeated team in college football. They crush teams like Georgia Tech and Pitt, but they struggle to beat Louisville and Florida State. They had a bizarre opening win against Duke. This is a team that I don't even know what they're going to be against Clemson. Clemson actually is the best team they have faced all season long. And I don't even know what to make of their competition. People will say, well, statistically, Notre Dame's one of the best defenses in college football. Well, so is Clemson. And Clemson's level of competition, you could argue, is better than Notre Dame's. Clemson has beaten teams like Miami and Virginia. Who's Notre Dame's best victory? Seriously. Am I supposed to believe that their 42-26 win over a Florida State team that tripped into a better quarterback situation is supposed to impress me? No, it doesn't. There is nobody on Notre Dame's schedule that is a legitimate contender this year. Meanwhile, Clemson, yeah, they're rolling over people, but they're rolling over some teams that are at least going to have some winning records at the end of the year. Like I said, Miami and Virginia, they are solid college football teams, and that Boston College team plays everyone tough. So I'm not impressed by Notre Dame, okay? And Notre Dame's offense makes no sense either. Despite the veteran quarterback Ian Book, he's not the strength of their offense. It's their running game. It's the running back for Notre Dame, Kyron Williams, who is leading the offense this year with 600 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns, going against a Clemson team that has allowed under 100 rushing yards per game this year. In my mind, this is going to be a prove-it game for Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is a bunch of frauds this year, and I think Clemson, the best team that they will face all year long, is an opportunity for them to prove me and the doubters wrong. One more game I'm watching very closely before I get to my picks on Saturday. The Oregon versus Stanford game. This is the first game of the year for the Pac-12. Remember, all the Pac-12 is just starting the year. Oregon is one of the favorites in the Pac-12. It's them and USC. Most people believe one of those two teams are going to win the Pac-12 this year. Well, guess what? Oregon or USC, if they go undefeated, could be in the college football playoff this year. Now, Oregon's an overwhelming favorite to win this game. But I'm interested to see what does this team look like, because remember, Justin Herbert graduated. He's in the NFL, having a great season, by the way, with the Chargers. Oregon now is going into the season without their stud quarterback. Can they do anything with a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator? Joe Moorhead is now calling plays up there in Eugene. So to me, I'm going to be very mindful to watch what this team does without their quarterback. I have faith in Mario Cristobal's ability to recruit. He's a great recruiter. He's a guy who understands offenses. He understands the game of football. But he's going into a season with a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback. By the way, that's Tyler Shue, for those who are wondering. Now, Cristobal hasn't confirmed if he's the starting quarterback, but they're expecting him to be the starting quarterback. So the fact that Oregon hasn't confirmed who their starting quarterback is, even though people believe it is Tyler Shue, combined with the fact that they have a new offensive play caller in Joe Moorhead, is something to keep an eye on, because with all that newness on the offensive side of the ball, there's no guarantee that Oregon is just going to run away from a Stanford team. Let's be realistic. They are down this year. They don't have the talent they've had in the past. David Shaw, every 5 years, David Shaw, the Stanford head coach, he just doesn't have a great team. And despite how great of a coach he is, I don't expect this to be a great Stanford team. Stanford's defense has way less talent than Oregon's offense. But just because of that doesn't mean that this rivalry game in the Pac-12 is going to be any different. I want to see how this game plays out before I make any conclusions on Oregon or Stanford or the Pac-12 this season. With all that being said, let's get to the games that I am giving you picks for this week. Third straight winning week. Last week we went 5-2. We are 38-23 overall on the year. So what do we got this week? We got Tulane at East Carolina. These are two teams that we have taken a look at in the past here on Football Fridays on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Anytime you have two teams with under 500 records who have poor defenses, you have to keep an eye out the over-under. And I'm taking the over 62, and here's why. Tulane's defense is allowing 32.8 points per game in the last 5, and they only won 2 of those 5 games. On the other side of the field, you have East Carolina, whose defense is allowing 37 points per game in the last 5, in which they only won 1 of those games. So both teams' offenses have potent running games, and they're going against teams that can't stop anybody. They're just not very good defenses. So I expect Tulane's Stephon Hutterson and ECU's Raja Harris to get a lot of action in what should be a high-scoring game. I'm projecting this game to be 38-31, which hits over the 62 in that matchup. Next game I'm going to be picking for you is Liberty plus 17 versus Virginia Tech. Now, Liberty is undefeated on the year. We picked them before. Remember that game versus Syracuse that we hit on. Liberty is not just undefeated, they are unafraid with their high-powered offense led by Malik Willis, who probably could be a starting quarterback in any of the Power 5 conferences, including the SEC. The guy is that talented. And his skills are perfectly complemented by a running game where is averaging the 7th most rushing yards in all of college football with 255.5 per game. So Liberty's offense can throw the ball, they can run the ball, and they're going against the Virginia Tech defense that is allowing 31.8 points per game in their last 5, despite their 3-2 record in those games. The defense has also been crushed by opposing running attacks. A miserable 206.4 rushing yards per game allowed. So you have one of the best running attacks in all of college football with a confident quarterback to complement it and an efficient offense in Liberty going against a below-average Virginia Tech defense who have trouble stopping the run. This sounds like a great opportunity to take advantage of an oversight by the odds makers. Plus 17 is too huge of a number. I think that the odds makers, they're showing you this year, whether it's in Vegas or New Jersey or any state, they're showing you that they're basing their odds and their lines on flawed formulas. And this may be another one of those flawed formulas. I'm saying Liberty plus 17 is way too much. So take advantage of that. I mentioned the Pac-12 earlier. I mentioned USC earlier. Well, USC is playing Arizona State. USC is one of the Pac-12 favorites. As I mentioned, on paper, they have some of the most talent in all of college football. But every year, Clay Helton puts up a dud. Every year, this Trojan football team just does not meet expectations. This is the first game of the 2020 season for both schools. As we've seen with other conferences like the Big Ten and SEC, that first game is opportunity for the better coaching staff to prepare their team to be ready. And that better coaching staff is Arizona State, led by head coach Herm Edwards, co-defensive coordinators Antonio Pierce and Marvin Lewis, plus a very underrated offensive coordinator in Zach Hill. This is one of the best and most experienced coaching staffs in all of college football. And they are preparing sophomore phenom Jaden Daniels, who was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in college football last year, and go against USC. Daniels had 17 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions last year. Now he's another year more mature, and the sky is the limit for this phenomenal athlete. Most of the Trojan talent is on offense, and the hiring of defensive coordinator Ty Orlando raised a lot of questions around college football since his 3 years at DC at Texas was not impressive at all. Despite all the talent they had on the field, they allowed 25 points per game in those 3 years, and it was some embarrassing performances along the way. I'm expecting this to be a shootout, and Arizona State is going to be well prepared for this game, and I don't think USC is going to lose the game per se, but I think that plus 11.5 is way too juicy. Anything double digits is not a good idea for a well-prepared Arizona State team. I don't care how talented USC is. They got no crowd. They're at home. It's 9 a.m. in the morning, and you know the more prepared team is going to be the better team in this game. I expect this to be a close shootout. So take Arizona State, whether it's 11 or 11.5, take the points. Anything double digits is an opportunity for you. A couple more games to hit on before we wrap up the podcast here. Minnesota is -7 at Illinois. It's been a rough start for what was a promising year for the Golden Gophers, but the 0-2 Minnesota football team is not without talent to defeat an Illinois team that is also 0-2. But the Fighting Illini are averaging 15.5 points per game on offense. Watch out for Minnesota's offensive duo, Tanner Morgan and Mohamed Ibrahim, to take full advantage of an Illinois defense that is allowing 39 points per game and 443 total yards allowed. Minnesota will be without defensive coordinator Joe Rossi due to a positive COVID-19 test. So I will not be surprised if head coach PJ Fleck, he uses the absence of one of the coaches as a motivational to win this one for Joe kind of mantra for Minnesota. Minnesota is -7 on the line. I wouldn't be surprised if they win by 10 or more because Illinois is that poor and Minnesota is that motivated to turn that 0-2 record and get a win on the board for them. Nebraska at Northwestern. This Nebraska team is kind of pathetic, and they're going against a Northwestern team that in 2 games is allowing 70.5 rushing yards per game. Nebraska scored all of their points this year, all their touchdowns, by running the ball on the ground. So Nebraska's offense is built on their ability to run. Northwestern is a team that stops the run, and the Wildcats are 2-0 this year, in a position to make themselves contenders to reach the Big Ten championship game. Don't forget, their defensive-minded head coach, Pat Fitzgerald, a talented quarterback, and Peyton Ramsey, and the advantage of playing at home. This is a lot to ask of a Nebraska team that suffered a demoralizing 35-point loss to Ohio State in the Open. I'm going to run with the Northwestern 3.5. Again, this is another game I wouldn't be surprised if it was a double-digit win because I think Nebraska is that they're just a mediocre football team, and I think Northwestern is motivated to get to that 3-0 mark. So here's the deal. I'm going back to the Big 12. Now, we've gotten wins on football Fridays here on Game Night when we hit the overs, but not the unders. And I understand that this game is an over 46. But when I ran my own mathematical formula for my picks for games, I end up with a 52. So I wanted to go back and make sure, am I really understanding this right? Well, Oklahoma State may have the best defense in the Big 12, but here are the total scores of their last 3 games. 54 versus Kansas. Kansas is a miserable football team. 45 versus Iowa State. And then 75 versus Texas. The game last week they lost an upset. In the 3 games since Skylar Thompson went down with a season-ending injury, K-State is still averaging about 28.6 points per game on the season. And the Wildcats are averaging even more points per game at home than their season average than on the road. This game is at home. So when they're averaging 39 points per game at home and they're welcoming Oklahoma State, who just got run out of town by a Texas team that put up a ton of points on them, I don't think this is a game that is going to be low scoring at all. And don't forget, Oklahoma State, they allowed 41 points to Texas. I'm not sitting here saying that Kansas State is going to win the game, but Kansas State is a respectable 4-2, and they did beat Oklahoma earlier this year. And their loss at West Virginia was on the road, not at home. When they're playing at home, 55-14 win over Kansas, 31-21 win over Texas Tech. In the Big 12, at home, Kansas State's a dangerous team. And at 4-2, they're not going to sit down and just be run over by an Oklahoma State team that may or may not have the best defense in the conference. So I'm hitting that over 46. I expect this to be like a Oklahoma State 28, Kansas State 24 kind of score. Or maybe like an Oklahoma State 33, Kansas State 20. Again, I think this is going to be a total of in the 50s. I think that, again, this is where the odds makers, remember we talked about ego, right? Their ego is saying Oklahoma State has a great defense. They're overlooking the fact that Oklahoma State's totals don't match the number they put on the board. Final game I want to hit on before we get out of here with the picks. Tennessee at Arkansas. Arkansas is a home dog at 1.5. Look, I understand why, okay? People just don't respect Arkansas. You know why I understand it? Because I used to be one of those people. That's right. I used to be one of those people who had no respect for what Sam Pittman and Barry Odom and that coaching staff is doing down there in Arkansas. And the Razorbacks are a competitive team. Arkansas is 5-0 this year against the spread. And they are at home against a team in Tennessee who have lost 3 straight games. The Tennessee Volunteers defense is allowing 33 points per game, and the fewest points they've allowed in 2020 is 12 against a shorthanded Missouri team that was missing almost 20 players due to these COVID-19 protocols. Now they got an Arkansas team that has been competitive in 4 of their 5 games this year. So don't let the 2-3 win-loss record deceive you. Arkansas is a better football team than Tennessee this year. The Tennessee Volunteers' average margin of loss in games is 27 points. So they, on average, lose by 27 points per game in their 3 losses this year. Arkansas's average loss is 13 points. Arkansas is competitive in every game, like I said. And you got a team that's 5-0 against the spread, and they're an underdog at home. I'm going Razorbacks. I believe in the job that Sam Pittman has done with this football team. He has them competitive. He has them winning games that nobody expected them to win or be competitive in. And outside of the Georgia loss at the very beginning of the year, they are in 1-score games in the fourth quarter every single time. Give me the Razorbacks. Give me the underdogs. I believe in the job that these coaches have done to turn this program around and get these young men motivated to play football every single Saturday. So those are my Football Friday picks and previews for the college football schedule. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hennig. I'll be back on the air for Sports Bash Saturday with my man Deshaun Hendricks on 97.3 ESPN from 12 to 2. And we'll be back with the regular game night show starting at 6 o'clock on Monday through Friday on 97.3 ESPN. May I remind you, if you are listening to this podcast, that means you're catching me on the YouTube channel, which means that I would like you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe, so you catch every episode of Game Night, Sports Bash Saturday, and the soon returning in the near future Mutant Blitz podcast. So I'm Josh Hennig, I'm your host, and I'll catch you on Saturday for Sports Bash Saturday, Monday for Game Night, and watch out, around the holidays, the return of the Mutant Blitz podcast.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.